The Elite Galactic Academy of Physical Excellence hung like a crystalline snowflake in the void, its transparent corridors and domed arenas reflecting the light of 3 distant suns. To most species in the Galactic Federation, this was the pinnacle of athletic achievement, where the fastest, strongest, and most agile beings came to prove their worth. And now, for the first time in its 1,000-year history, it was about to receive its first human student. Is that really it? Principal Zix 427 squinted all 4 of his eyes at the holographic display, mandibles clicking in what his species considered a snort. The human girl on the screen looked disappointingly ordinary: 2 arms, 2 legs, and not even a hint of natural armor or enhanced musculature. According to the acceptance protocols, she qualified, Assistant Director Vreen said, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with uncertainty. Though I must admit, the testing parameters might need adjustment. Surely there's been some mistake. The human's transport pod docked with all the grace of a Kralaxian mud wrestler, causing several nearby maintenance drones to scatter. As the airlock cycled, a small crowd of students gathered, some floating, others crawling, and a few rolling, all eager to catch a glimpse of this supposed athlete from the emerging species. She stepped out wearing the standard academy uniform, which somehow managed to look even more awkward on her smooth, bilateral frame. The assembled students didn't even try to hide their amusement. "Look at those inefficient locomotion appendages," a Zentaran student whispered, his crystalline body reflecting prismatic light patterns of mockery. "How does it even maintain balance with just 2? A cluster of Morphoxians, their bodies shifting through various shades of superiority, formed what they thought was a subtle gossip cloud near the ceiling. "I heard humans can't even regrow their limbs," one bubbled. "What happens if she breaks one during training? Probably goes back to their primitive medical facilities and gets replaced with crude mechanical parts," another replied, causing the entire cloud to ripple with barely contained laughter. The human girl, whose test scores had somehow earned her a spot in the galaxy's most prestigious athletic institution, walked past them all with the kind of confidence that made several species instinctively check their threat assessment glands. She moved with a fluidity that seemed almost purposeful. "Welcome to the Elite Galactic Academy," a hovering administrative drone chirped, its translation matrix struggling to maintain a respectful tone. "Though we must advise that our facilities are calibrated for peak performance athletes, perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of our remedial institutions." The human's lips curved upward in what her species called a smile, but to the gathered aliens, it looked remarkably like the expression their ancestors wore just before proving someone catastrophically wrong. "I think I'll manage," she said, adjusting the gravity compensator on her wrist with practiced ease. "When do we start?" The tour began in what the Academy called the standard gravity chamber, though by human standards, it was anything but standard. Floating platforms shifted constantly, creating an ever-changing obstacle course that would have made an Olympic gymnast think twice. "This is our basic training facility," the guide drone explained, its holographic display showing various alien athletes performing what looked like impossible feats of agility. "Though perhaps we should start you in the juvenile section." The human girl was already halfway across the room, leaping from platform to platform with a grace that made several observing instructors drop their data pads. She landed on the final platform with a slight bounce, turned and gave a small wave to the stunned audience below. "Impossible," came a melodious voice from the entrance. A Nexilian athlete named Kazoth glided into the room, her iridescent scales rippling with barely contained irritation. "The platforms are programmed for advanced students only. You must have activated the beginner's protocol." The drone quickly checked its readings. "Actually, Champion Kazoth, the system is running at standard difficulty." Kazoth's tail lashed in what her species considered a challenge gesture. "We'll see how long that lasts. The exhibition games are in 3 cycles after all." She slithered away, leaving behind a faint scent of competitive pheromones that made several smaller species sneeze. "Don't mind Kazoth," rumbled a friendly voice. A massive Bulgarian named Tox waddled over, his gelatinous form wobbling with each step. "She's just worried about losing her title as fastest in the 0G sprint. I'm Tox, by the way, 3rd-year student and unofficial campus guide." The human accepted his offered pseudopod with a firm handshake, causing Tox to ripple with delight. A proper greeting. You've studied our customs. Most new species just stare at my digestive organs. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of head coach Zix, a being composed entirely of crystalline energy fields. So, this is our human participant. The coach's frequency shifted to what most species recognized as skepticism. I've reviewed your application files. Quite interesting methodology you humans employ. Running on solid ground? How quaint. The coach led them through a series of increasingly complex training zones. There was the atmospheric variance chamber, where the very air could shift from thick as soup to thin as the stratosphere in seconds. The variable gravity arena boasted zones ranging from crush depth pressure to near zero G, often right next to each other. These facilities are designed to push the limits of every known species, Coach Zix explained, their energy patterns forming what might have been a smirk. Though perhaps we should start you with something more basic, the juvenile obstacle course, perhaps? The human girl stepped into the atmospheric variance chamber without hesitation. The air density immediately increased to levels that would have crushed most beginners, yet she moved through it with calculated efficiency, her breathing controlled and movements precise. Fascinating, muttered Dr. Fix, the Academy's xenobiologist, who had been quietly observing from a corner. The human respiratory system appears to be adapting in real time. And look at that musculature response to the pressure changes. Kazoth, who had been lurking nearby, made a sound like wind through crystals, her species equivalent of a scoff. Lucky accident. Let's see how she handles the real challenges. The exhibition games will test every aspect of physical capability, speed, strength, endurance, especially in conditions humans never evolved to handle. Speaking of which, Tox bubbled helpfully, you might want to read up on the event schedule. We've got the zero-G sprint, the high-pressure relay, the atmospheric adaptation trial, and of course the infamous multi-gravity marathon. The human girl nodded, her expression revealing nothing as she continued to move through the chamber, each step more confident than the last. Several younger students had stopped their own training to watch, their various sensory organs fixed on this strange new competitor. Well, Coach Zix's energy field flickered with what might have been reluctant approval. At least you haven't expired yet. That's more than we can say for the last non-standard atmosphere species who tried the chamber. Poor fellow had to be shipped home in a stasis pod. The human's only response was to increase her speed, moving through the dense air with a fluidity that made even Kazoth's scales ripple with unease. The exhibition games were about to get very interesting indeed. Over the next few weeks, the Academy's monitoring systems recorded some peculiar patterns. The human student was logging more training hours than any other competitor, often showing up when most species were in their dormant cycles. The maintenance drones reported the environmental chambers being used at odd hours, cycling through increasingly extreme conditions. She's either brilliant or insane, Dr. Fix muttered one day, reviewing the logs with Principal Zix 427. Look at these training parameters. She's deliberately cycling between high and low gravity states, forcing her body to adapt faster than our standard protocols recommend. The principal's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And she hasn't suffered cellular collapse yet. That's the fascinating part, Dr. Fix's tentacles waved excitedly at the holographic readouts. Her adaptation rate is, well, it's unprecedented. During regular training hours, the human maintained what appeared to be a modest performance level. She kept pace with the mid-tier athletes, never drawing too much attention. But Tox, who had appointed himself as her unofficial training partner, noticed something odd. Your heartbeat never increases beyond baseline, he observed one day after a particularly grueling session in the high-pressure chamber. Even when you appear to be struggling. The human gave him what he'd learned was a conspiratorial wink. Maybe humans just have efficient circulatory systems. Kazoth, who always seemed to be training nearby, made her scales flash in the pattern that indicated disbelief. Or maybe you're not pushing yourself hard enough. Some of us take the exhibition game seriously. But Kazoth's words carried less bite than before. Even she had started watching the human with something approaching curiosity, especially after the incident in the zero-G chamber. One of the younger students, a floatling named Pip, had gotten caught in a gravity flux. Their natural levitation sacks had failed, sending them spinning toward a high-gravity zone that would have compressed them into a very unhappy puddle. The human had reacted instantly, pushing off from her training platform with precise force, intercepting Pip's trajectory and using her body's momentum to swing them both to safety. "How did you calculate the intersection vector so quickly?" Pip had asked, their levitation sacks still quivering. The human had shrugged. "Baseball." The answer made no sense to anyone, but the incident marked a turning point. Students started approaching her with questions about human physical capabilities. A group of graviton youngsters were fascinated by her description of human sports played entirely in standard gravity. The atmospheric specialists peppered her with questions about how humans had managed to become an apex species without being able to metabolize exotic gases. But it was during the night cycles that the real training happened. The human would slip into the most advanced training chambers, methodically pushing through routines that would have impressed even the senior instructors. The maintenance drones recorded everything but, being simple machines, didn't realize the significance of a bipedal species casually running laps in triple standard gravity. One night she had company. Tox, whose species didn't require regular sleep cycles, had followed her out of curiosity. "You've been sandbagging," he accused, his gelatinous form quivering with excitement rather than anger. "I prefer to think of it as strategic performance management," she replied, taking a break from what appeared to be a light warm-up in crushing gravity. "But why?" Tox wobbled closer, lowering his voice despite them being alone. "You could easily be at the top of the rankings." The human smiled, adjusting her gravity compensator. "Because, my amorphous friend, there's something humans understand very well, the element of surprise. Besides," she added, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "watching Kazoth try to figure out why our intimidation tactics aren't working is half the fun." Tox's body rippled with suppressed laughter. "You know she's been analyzing recordings of your training sessions?" "Oh, I know, she's welcome to them, but you might notice," the human gestured to her wrist device, "I only wear the performance monitors during official training hours." Tox's central mass contracted in what humans would recognize as a gasp. "You sneaky little... You're going to shock everyone at the exhibition, aren't you?" The human was already moving toward the chamber's control panel. "That's the plan. Want to see what I can really do?" What followed made Tox seriously question everything he thought he knew about bipedal species limitations. When the human finally finished her actual training routine, his entire body was tinged with the blue shade of awestruck disbelief. "The look on Kazoth's face during the exhibition will be priceless," he managed to say. The human wiped some sweat from her brow, her eyes gleaming with determination. "That's not why I'm doing this," she said, suddenly serious. "This isn't about showing off. It's about proving that humans deserve to be here, that we can compete with the best the galaxy has to offer." She paused, then grinned. "Though you're right, Kazoth's face will be priceless." The exhibition games began with a series of qualifying events designed to sort competitors into appropriate skill brackets. Most new students typically landed in the intermediate categories. Nobody expected anything different from the human. The first event was the atmospheric adaptability test. Competitors had to maintain physical activity while the chamber cycled through different atmospheric compositions and pressures. Most species excelled in their native conditions but struggled elsewhere. "Watch closely," Kazoth announced to her gathered admirers. "This should be enlightening." Her scales rippled with anticipated satisfaction as the human stepped into the chamber. The test began with standard atmosphere, then shifted rapidly to high-pressure methane. The human's performance remained steady. When it switched to low-pressure nitrogen, she didn't even break stride. By the time they reached exotic gas mixtures, several instructors were huddled around the monitoring equipment. "This can't be right," one muttered, tapping the readout. "Her efficiency ratings are actually improving as the conditions get worse." Kazoth's smug expression had faded to something closer to concern. "She must be using some kind of prohibited technology." "Full bioscan shows no artificial enhancements," Dr. Fix announced, all 6 eyes fixed on the readings. "Just standard issue gravity compensators and atmospheric filters. Everything else is natural adaptation." The 0G agility course came next. Competitors had to navigate a complex obstacle course in complete weightlessness, with bonus points for style and efficiency. Most species relied on their natural adaptations, gas bladders, telekinetic pulses, or gravitational control organs. The human used none of these. Instead, she treated every surface as a launch point, calculating trajectories that seemed to defy conventional physics. She ricocheted through the course like a precision instrument, each movement flowing into the next. Remarkable conservation of momentum, Coach Zix observed their energy field pulsing with professional interest. Notice how she uses minimal force for maximum effect. Tox, watching from the sidelines, tried to suppress his knowing wobble. He'd seen her real capabilities during those late-night training sessions. This was still just a fraction of what she could do. The high-G endurance trial proved even more surprising. Competitors had to perform a series of physical tasks while gravity gradually increased. Most species dropped out when the pressure reached twice their homeworld standard. The human kept going at 3 times standard gravity. Impossible, Kazoth hissed, her scales now flashing warning patterns. Their planet's gravity is even lower than standard. She should have been eliminated first. Actually, Pip chimed in, having become something of an expert on human physiology. Their muscles and skeletal structure are remarkably dense for their size. They evolved as persistence predators, capable of— Nobody asked you, Floatling, Kazoth snapped, but her tail was lashing with poorly concealed anxiety. The qualification rounds continued, and a pattern emerged. The human never topped the rankings, but she consistently placed in the upper quartile of every event. More impressively, she showed no signs of fatigue between trials. It's the stamina that's most interesting, Dr. Fix explained to a growing crowd of curious students. Most species need recovery time between events. She just keeps going. The attention wasn't all positive. Kazoth's supporters began spreading rumors about hidden advantages and suspicious training methods. They demanded additional scans and equipment checks before each event. The human submitted to every inspection with that same enigmatic smile that was starting to drive Kazoth crazy. What are you hiding? Kazoth finally confronted her after the low-G precision test. Nobody adapts this quickly to every environment. Maybe you should spend less time worrying about my performance and more time preparing for the finals, the human suggested mildly. Your last run in the pressure chamber looked a little shaky. Kazoth's scales flared crimson, a clear sign of rage in her species. You dare? I am the defending champion. I have won more medals than your entire species has space stations. For now, the human replied and walked away. The exchange was witnessed by dozens of students, and the story spread quickly through the Academy's gossip channels. The rivalry between the defending champion and the mysterious human rookie became the hot topic of discussion. Betting pools are forming, Tox informed her during their regular training session. The odds are interesting. Oh? The human was cooling down after completing the variable atmosphere sprint in near record time. Most species are betting against you, he bubbled apologetically. But the volume of bets in your favor is surprisingly high, especially from the science department. She laughed. Dr. Fix finally figured it out, didn't they? They've been running simulations based on your qualification data. The results were apparently quite enlightening. The final qualifying event was announced, the multi-environment relay. Competitors would have to navigate through chambers featuring different gravitational fields, atmospheric conditions, and physical obstacles, all while maintaining competitive speed. This is where we separate the real athletes from the lucky amateurs, Kazoth announced during the pre-event briefing, her scales gleaming with challenge patterns. No more holding back, no more tricks, just pure athletic ability. The human's response was typically understated. Couldn't agree more. As they took their positions at the starting line, the tension in the air was thick enough to register on atmospheric sensors. Kazoth shot one last look at her human rival, expecting to see nervousness or doubt. Instead, she saw something that made her scales pale, the look of someone who was finally about to stop holding back. The grand arena of the Elite Galactic Academy shimmered like a soap bubble stretched across space itself. Its transparent dome offered spectacular views of the 3 suns setting in sequence, casting prismatic shadows across the gathered crowd of spectators. Representatives from over 50 spacefaring civilizations had come to watch the Exhibition Games finals. Quite the turnout, Tox commented, his gelatinous form vibrating with excitement. I don't think I've seen this many diplomatic vessels since the Quantum Olympics. The arena itself was a technological marvel. Massive environmental generators could transform each section into distinct biomes within seconds. Gravity plates lined the floor in a complex grid pattern, allowing for instant transitions between different gravitational fields. The air itself could shift from breathable to lethal in moments, testing each competitor's environmental adaptation systems. Welcome to the 127th Exhibition Games Finals. The announcement boomed in 47 different languages simultaneously. Today's events will push our athletes beyond the known limits of physical achievement. In the preparation chamber, the human adjusted her gravity compensator with practiced precision. Around her, other finalists were making their own preparations. Kazoth's scales were cycling through warm-up patterns, her movements fluid and confident. She'd earned her champion status through years of dedication, and it showed. The first event will be the gravitational gauntlet, the announcer declared. Athletes must traverse 5 zones of increasing gravitational intensity while maintaining optimal performance metrics. The human took her position at the starting line. Next to her, Kazoth's scales flickered with determination. The other finalists, a quantum leaper, a void walker, and a graviton, all had natural advantages in gravitational manipulation. The signal flashed. They were off. The first zone started at standard gravity. The human matched pace with Kazoth, their strides perfectly synchronized. The quantum leaper bounded ahead, its natural ability to partially ignore gravitational forces, giving it an early lead. 2 times gravity. The void walker started to struggle, its ethereal form compressed by the increasing pressure. The human stride shortened, but her pace remained steady. 3 times gravity. Kazoth's scales were flashing with effort now, her serpentine movement requiring more energy to maintain speed. The human's breathing was controlled, her form efficient. 4 times gravity. The quantum leaper finally faltered, its jumps becoming erratic. Only 3 competitors remained in contention. 5 times gravity. This was the moment Kazoth had been waiting for. Her species had evolved on a high-gravity world. This should have been her element. But when she looked to her right, expecting to see the human finally crushed by the intense gravitational force, she instead saw something impossible. The human was running, not struggling, not fighting against the gravity, but running with the same mechanical precision she'd shown in standard conditions. Her movements were economical, her breathing rhythmic, her eyes focused ahead. Impossible, Kazoth gasped, her own scales dulling with fatigue. They crossed the finish line together, but the human's bio readings told the real story. Her system was barely stressed. A remarkable showing, the announcer boomed, but this is just the beginning. The atmospheric assault course came next. Competitors had to navigate a complex obstacle course while the air itself changed composition every few seconds. Most species relied heavily on their atmospheric filters, trading speed for survival. The human took a different approach. She timed her movements to the atmospheric shifts, holding her breath through the toxic zones and accelerating through compatible ones. It was like watching a dance choreographed to an invisible rhythm. She's using the atmospheric changes to her advantage, Dr. Fix announced to the stunned crowd. Each toxic zone forces others to slow down, but she's anticipated the pattern. The variable velocity vector challenge followed. Athletes had to maintain control while being subjected to rapidly changing directional forces. The graviton excelled here, its natural ability to manipulate local gravity fields, making it a favorite. But again, the human showed why her species had earned their place in the games. She turned each force into momentum, rolling with impacts that should have thrown her off course, converting potential energy into kinetic advantage with devastating efficiency. Look at those reaction times. Coach Zix's energy field pulsed with professional admiration. She's not just responding to the changes, she's anticipating them. The finals culminated in the legendary Omnithlon, a comprehensive test of speed, strength, endurance, and adaptation. Every environmental variable was in play. Gravity shifted randomly. Atmospheric conditions changed without warning. Temperature zones ranged from near absolute zero to plasma edge hot. Kazoth took an early lead, her years of experience showing in every movement. The remaining finalists pushed their bodies to their absolute limits, knowing this was their last chance for glory. The human stayed in the middle of the pack, her performance steady but unremarkable, until the final lap. That's when she did something that would be talked about in the academy for generations to come. She disengaged her gravity compensator. "Is she insane?" someone in the crowd screamed. But there was method in this apparent madness. Without the compensator's stabilizing influence, she was fully exposed to every gravitational shift, but also free from its response lag. In the microseconds between field changes, she had complete control over her momentum, and she moved like water flowing uphill, like lightning with purpose, like evolution given conscious direction. Every step landed exactly where it needed to be. Every motion flowed into the next with liquid precision. Kazoth, realizing what was happening, pushed herself to respond. Her scales flashed through every pattern in her species' arsenal, drawing on energy reserves she didn't know she had. But the human had been preparing for this moment since day one. All those late-night training sessions, all those carefully measured performances, had been leading to this. She crossed the finish line 3 full seconds ahead of Kazoth, an eternity in competitive racing. The arena fell silent for a moment before erupting in a cacophony of cheers, whistles, clicks, and electromagnetic pulses of appreciation. Kazoth slithered over to her rival, scales shifting through complex, emotional patterns. "You could have done this all along," she said. It wasn't a question. The human nodded, still catching her breath. "But then I wouldn't have learned your patterns, understood the course variables, or figured out how to optimize my performance for each challenge." "You turned the entire qualification process into an extended training session," Kazoth realized, her scales showing reluctant admiration. "Humans don't just run fast," the champion explained, offering her hand in the traditional sporting gesture. "We learn, we adapt, we overcome. That's how we survived on a world that tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways." Kazoth wrapped her tail around the offered hand in acceptance. "The next exhibition games will be interesting." The human smiled. "They certainly will be, especially since I won't be the only human competing." Above them, in the diplomatic section of the arena, representatives from Earth were already filing applications for the next year's admissions. The age of human athletics in the galactic community had officially begun. The days following the exhibition games brought changes that rippled through the academy like waves in zero gravity. The human champion's victory had shattered more than just records. It had broken down barriers of perception that had stood for centuries. During the post-competition analysis session, Dr. Fix could barely contain their excitement. "The implications are extraordinary. We've been measuring alien species against our standard metrics, but perhaps we should be rethinking our entire approach to physical education." Principal Zix 427's mandibles clicked in agreement. "The human's performance has certainly given us much to consider. Their training methodology alone deserves its own research department." In the student quarters, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The same beings who had once whispered mockery now spoke with newfound respect. Young Pip had started a study group focused on human athletic techniques, which had surprisingly broad attendance. "Is it true that humans used to chase their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion?" a Graviton student asked during one session. "That's how they survived before developing tools," Tox explained, wobbling with professorial dignity. "They called it persistence hunting. Now imagine applying that same endurance to our training protocols." Kazoth, showing remarkable adaptability herself, had become one of the most vocal advocates for human integration into the academy. Her scales now displayed patterns of professional respect whenever she discussed her former rival. The most valuable lesson, she explained to a group of junior athletes, wasn't about speed or strength, it was about strategy. While we focused on individual events, she was analyzing patterns, learning our limitations, and developing countermeasures. That's a level of competitive intelligence we need to incorporate into our training. The faculty had been quick to respond. Coach Zix's energy field buzzed with excitement as they announced new additions to the curriculum. "We're introducing adaptive training programs based on the human model. Multi-environmental conditioning will now be mandatory for all students." The Academy's administration found itself flooded with applications, not just from humans, but from species across the galaxy, who had previously thought themselves unsuited for elite athletic training. "It's about perspective," the human champion explained during an interview with the Galactic Sports Network. "Every species has their advantages. The trick is figuring out how to use them creatively. Humans aren't the strongest, fastest, or most naturally gifted athletes in the galaxy. We just never learned when to quit." The interview became required viewing for all new students. Even more impressive were the practical changes being implemented. The training facilities were being modified to accommodate a wider range of physiological needs. The qualification standards were being revised to account for different types of athletic potential. "We're not lowering our standards," Principal Zix 427 announced at a faculty meeting. "We're expanding our understanding of what athletic excellence means in a galactic context." For future human students, the path was now clear. The first champion had done more than win a competition. She had proven that humans could compete at the highest levels of galactic athletics. More importantly, she had shown that sometimes the greatest advantage wasn't natural ability, but the determination to push beyond perceived limitations. "You've changed things here," Tox told her on her last day, his gelatinous form tinged with the blue of fond memories. "And not just for humans." She looked around at the academy that had become her home, at the mixed groups of students training together, sharing techniques, learning from each other's strengths. That was the goal all along. Sports aren't just about winning, they're about bringing people together, about pushing the boundaries of what's possible. As her transport pod prepared for departure, the academy's entire population gathered to bid farewell. Kazoth led them in a display of chromatic respect, their combined bioluminescence creating a spectacular light show against the backdrop of space. The age of isolation was over. The galaxy's greatest sporting institution had learned that excellence comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most impressive abilities are not the ones you can see at first glance. Years later, the Elite Galactic Academy of Physical Excellence would look back on that first human champion as a turning point in their history. The display case holding her victory medallion became a popular spot for new students of all species, a reminder that preconceptions were made to be broken. The Academy's recruitment brochure underwent significant revisions. Where it once emphasized natural abilities and genetic advantages, it now highlighted adaptability and determination. The section on human students grew from a cautionary footnote to an entire chapter, complete with holographic training demonstrations. Perhaps the most telling change was in the betting patterns for subsequent exhibition games. Species that had once been considered physically disadvantaged started attracting serious wagers. The bookmakers had to develop entirely new algorithms to account for what they now called the human factor, the tendency of supposedly limited species to dramatically exceed expectations. But the greatest legacy wasn't in the records or the rulebooks. It was in the way species looked at each other and at themselves. The notion that any one form of physical excellence could be superior to all others had been permanently dismantled. As for the aliens' perception of humans, well, they still found it amusing that these bipedal creatures insisted on running everywhere instead of using proper levitation technology. But now there was a newfound respect in their amusement and a silent acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, those weird two-legged persistence predators were onto something after all.